When you hear the word demon, what pops into your head? Probably something from a horror movie, right? But what if I told you the original biblical story is way wilder, more complex, and actually part of a massive cosmic conflict that's been hiding in plain sight? Let's dive in, because the story the Bible actually tells is about so much more than just a spooky possession. Yeah, this is the picture most of us have in our heads. We think of the Gospels, Jesus casting some evil spirit into a herd of pigs, and that's fair. It's a pretty straightforward picture of good versus evil. But, as we're about to see, that's really just one tiny piece of a much, much bigger puzzle. So, what if those possession stories aren't the main event at all? What if they're just little skirmishes, small battles in a much older, much larger war? The biblical writers seem to think so. They describe a conflict that involves the entire spiritual world. And believe it or not, it all hinges on a single verse that was misunderstood for centuries. Okay, so first things first, we gotta move beyond the simple idea of good angels fighting bad demons. The reality in the text is way more nuanced. And for a long, long time, a key piece of this whole puzzle was literally lost in translation. For centuries, scholars were scratching their heads over this one passage in the Old Testament. It described a super important moment in history, the scattering of people at the Tower of Babel, but there was this one little detail that just didn't make any sense, chronologically speaking. See, here's the problem. It's a timing thing. The verse says God divided up all the nations according to the number of the sons of Israel. But the Tower of Babel story happens way, way before Israel even existed as a people. It's an anachronism. It doesn't fit. So what gives? Well, the answer came, and boy did it come, in the middle of the 20th century, with one of the most incredible archaeological finds of all time. Tucked away in the Dead Sea Scrolls, scholars found a much, much older version of this exact same passage, and it said something completely different. And here it is. The original text doesn't say sons of Israel. It says sons of God. Now, that might sound like a small change, but trust me, it's a bombshell. This one little change unlocks an entirely different worldview. It suggests that after the Babel rebellion, God basically disinherited the nations of the world. He said, fine. And he assigned them, all 70 of them, to be governed by 70 lesser divine beings from his heavenly staff. Okay, so that begs the question, right? Who are these sons of God? This brings us to a super important word. The Bible describes this whole family of spiritual beings, and the term it uses for them might surprise you. The word we need to know is Elohim. Now, this isn't a name like Michael or Gabriel. Think of it more like a category or a job title. It just means any being whose natural home is the spiritual world. It's a really broad term that covers a whole range of entities. And this is where it gets wild. The Bible slaps this label Elohim on a whole bunch of different beings. It's used for the one true God, of course, but it's also used for the gods of other nations, for members of God's heavenly council, and even for what we may call territorial spirits. So the spiritual world isn't just God and angels. It's presented as this complex bureaucracy, a kind of divine family, and some members of that family went rogue. Now, these rebellious Elohim, they weren't just free-floating troublemakers. According to this ancient worldview, they were given specific territories to rule over. This created what scholars now call cosmic geography. Okay, so this is where it all clicks together. Those sons of God from Deuteronomy 32, the ones put in charge of the nations, they became corrupt. They started accepting worship for themselves, and they became the hostile gods of those nations. Each one was tied to a specific people in a specific place on earth. And this idea, this cosmic map, it doesn't just stay in the Old Testament. Oh no, it comes roaring into the New Testament. When you read the Apostle Paul and he talks about fighting against principalities and powers and rulers, he's not being metaphorical. He's pulling directly from this Old Testament worldview. He's talking about the corrupt Elohim, the spiritual rulers of the nation. All right, so we've got these corrupt regional gods, but what about the big boss? What about Satan? Well, his story is also an evolution from what was basically a job title to the ultimate proper name for cosmic evil. Here's a fun fact. If you go hunting for Satan, the arch-villain with the pitchfork, in the Old Testament, you're not really going to find him. Not in the way you'd expect. Instead, you'd find a member of God's divine council just doing his job. The key is in the original Hebrew. In a book like Job, the figure isn't called Satan. He's called Ha-Satan. That little ha in front is like the word the. So it's not a name, it's a title, the Satan, which means the accuser or the adversary.
It's his job to test humanity's loyalty. It's only later, in the New Testament, that this job title becomes the proper name for God's number one enemy.
So you can literally watch this idea evolve over time. It starts in Genesis with just an unnamed rebellious serpent. Much later, you get the accuser, a heavenly prosecutor doing his job in the book of Job. Then, in the period between the Old and New Testaments, writers started connecting the dots, applying that adversarial title to the original serpent from Eden. And by the time you get to the New Testament, the job title has fully become a proper name: Satan.
Okay, so the Old Testament basically lays out this massive problem, this world hijacked by multiple supernatural rebellions. So what's the solution? Well, that's what the New Testament is all about. It's presented as the strategic, divine answer to every single one of those problems. Scholars who dig into this see three major cosmic rebellions that created this mess. First, there's the Eden Rebellion, the one that brought death into the world. Second, this really bizarre event in Genesis 6 where sons of God, also called Watchers, corrupt the human bloodline. And third, the Babel Rebellion, which we just talked about, where the nations were handed over to these corrupt divine rulers. Those are the three big problems.
And this is the payoff. For every single one of those problems, the New Testament presents Jesus' work as the specific, targeted solution. It's like a divine countermove for each rebellion. The Eden Rebellion brought death. Jesus conquers it with his resurrection. The Genesis 6 rebellion corrupted humanity. Jesus purifies it. The Babel Rebellion gave the nations to corrupt gods. Jesus sends out his followers to take them back. It's a point-for-point reversal. So when you see it this way, the whole story changes. It's not just a bunch of disconnected myths or random acts of evil. It's a single epic saga of cosmic treason, of a world handed over to hostile powers, and a meticulously planned divine invasion to take it all back. But the story doesn't stop there. It actually sets up a wild new destiny for humanity, a kind of promotion to a position that was once held by those very same spiritual beings who rebelled in the first place. I mean, listen to this question the Apostle Paul asks. It's absolutely stunning. Don't you know that you will judge angels? The ultimate plan, according to this worldview, is that redeemed humans will eventually displace the rebellious sons of God. They will literally judge these beings and take their place in God's divine council, ruling the new creation with him. And that, really, is the final question this whole worldview leaves us with. It asks us to see the world differently, not as just a neutral physical stage, but as the central battleground in an ancient spiritual conflict. It suggests that every place and every one of us is part of that story. So, what changes when you start to see the world that way?